Alright, I need you to just picture this. A part of the internet you've never seen. It's not the part with social media or online shopping. This is the dark web, a place where anonymity is not just a feature, it's a law. A digital underworld where cryptocurrencies are the only currency and identities are completely hidden. It's a place where you can find anything for a price. And I mean anything. In this strange, dark, and mysterious corner of the internet, there was a website that offered an unthinkable service. Hitman for hire. It looked like any other online store, with a professional layout and a list of services. It had reviews, a support team, and a money-back guarantee. The only difference was that the product was human life. And this is where our story starts. Mark, a regular guy, a software developer, had a bitter rivalry with an old colleague named David. A failed project, a professional betrayal, whatever the reason, Mark was furious. One night, fueled by anger and a little too much alcohol, he stumbled across the Hitman website. He thought it was a joke, a scam. On a whim, he placed an order for David's assassination, using Bitcoin to pay, believing it was all just a sick game. But then Mark received an email. It wasn't a joke, it was a confirmation, along with a terrifying piece of proof. A recent photograph of David taken outside his home, along with a note that simply said, "Contract approved." In that moment, the blood drained from Mark's face. He knew he had just stepped into a real-life horror story, a true crime saga he couldn't take back. What would you do if you realized your life had a price tag and an invisible killer was on their way to collect? That's the chilling question David had to face after he received that haunting email. The photograph of him, a single ordinary moment in his day, had turned a digital threat into a terrifyingly real, creepy fact. David's horror wasn't rooted in a visible enemy. It was an unsolved mystery. He didn't know who had placed the order, why, or when the assassin would strike. All he knew was that a faceless force on the dark web had activated a hunt, and he was the prey. Desperate, David went to the police. He tried to explain the dark web, the Bitcoin, and the Hitman for hire websites. But to them, it was just a scam, a wild fantasy. The police were skeptical and dismissed it as a malicious hoax. With no help from law enforcement, David was left to defend himself against a ghost with no face. His life became a living nightmare. He was afraid to leave his house, and every ringing phone made him jump. Every strange car that stopped outside, every unfamiliar person who walked by became a potential threat. He lived in a constant state of paranoia, a horror story where fear was his only companion. He started to suspect everyone, including his old colleague Mark, but he had no proof. David tried to navigate the dark web himself, but he only found himself lost in a dark world where everything was perfectly hidden. Just when he felt most helpless, a strange clue appeared. A small piece of paper was slipped under his door with a single, handwritten line. "Contract confirmed. We will arrive tonight." Alright, so here's where it gets really strange. What would you do if you knew for an absolute fact that a hitman was on their way to kill you, and you only had a few hours left to live? That was the chilling reality facing David after he read that note. "We will arrive tonight." It wasn't a vague threat anymore. It was a cold, hard promise. In a complete panic, he realized there was no fighting a faceless, invisible enemy. This time, when David called the police, his voice was so desperate, so utterly convincing, they had no choice but to listen. He emailed them the photo and the terrifying note. This time, they took him seriously. A special task force of cybercrime experts was formed. They faced an impossible investigation. Not a manhunt for a killer, but a digital hunt for an invisible trail on the dark web. The digital cold case began. Experts had to work with the thinnest of data fragments, encrypted Bitcoin transaction codes, IP addresses hidden behind layers of encryption, and self-destructing messages. This was a true unsolved mystery from the start, a case that felt impossible to crack. But here's the thing about the dark web: even the most secure systems can have a flaw. A small coding error in the Hitman website itself left a critical clue. When the task force finally managed to decrypt a tiny piece of the website's source code, it revealed a terrifying truth. The person who created the site was not the assassin. They were a middleman, someone who took the orders and funneled them to a different, more serious network. And the trail of breadcrumbs led the police to a familiar address, to a regular house. And the identity of this middleman was even more chilling. It was Mark, David's old colleague, the one with whom he had a bitter rivalry. All right, so here's where this true crime story takes a turn you never saw coming. The police have traced the Hitman for Hire website back to a familiar address, the home of Mark, David's bitter rival. The detectives, convinced they had their man, prepared for a raid. Just picture this: a quiet suburban street, a normal-looking house with a manicured lawn, and a garage door that's just a little bit ajar. This wasn't some evil lair straight out of a movie. It was the home of a regular guy. The police burst in, and there was Mark, sitting at his computer looking terrified and pale. He didn't fight back. He looked like he was expecting them. The initial interrogation was frustrating. Mark kept insisting he wasn't a killer. He was just a programmer, he said. He built the website as a side project, a way to make some easy Bitcoin. He never thought anyone would actually use it. He confessed to receiving David's order, but here's where the strange, dark, and mysterious part begins. He said he passed the order on to a different network. He was just a middleman, a digital go-between. He didn't know who the assassins were or what they did. He just passed the information and collected his cut. The detectives at first didn't believe him, but when they checked his computer, they found nothing linking him to any of David's threats. They were able to recover a series of encrypted messages that showed Mark was not the one communicating with David. He was just forwarding information. The real threats, the real horror story, were coming from a completely different source. Then came the final, chilling confession. Mark revealed that he had also become a victim. After the order for David was placed, the anonymous network had turned on him. They had taken control of his computers, stolen his funds, and threatened to expose him if he didn't continue working for them. The grudge against David was real, but the Hitman plot was an elaborate conspiracy theory orchestrated by a ghost on the internet. A faceless puppet master who had used Mark's anger and greed as bait to get him to work for them. This wasn't a simple revenge plot. It was a digital web of extortion and murder. And the real killer was still out there, vanished from view. Mark wasn't the monster. He was just another pawn in a game far bigger and more terrifying than he could have ever imagined. All right, so the truth is out. Mark wasn't the monster. He was just a patsy, a terrified puppet caught in a game of digital extortion. The real killer, the mastermind who had used a simple office rivalry to set a deadly plot in motion, was still out there, a complete ghost. This wasn't a story about one man's revenge. It was a chilling conspiracy theory about a faceless organization that had learned to weaponize human anger and greed. With Mark's help, the cybercrime task force launched a final, desperate hunt to find the real killer. They worked side by side with Mark, using his inside knowledge of the dark web to try and trace the network. Mark and David, once bitter rivals, were now united by a single, terrifying truth. A common enemy had turned both of their lives into a horror story. They followed the trail of encrypted messages, decrypted countless lines of code, and traced anonymous transactions across a dozen different cryptocurrencies. They pieced together fragments of information, creating a digital profile of their enemy. But the more they learned, the more terrifying the truth became. The mastermind had no face, no name, and no traceable identity. The network wasn't a single person. It was a massive, sophisticated organization operating completely off the grid. It was an unsolved mystery that would never truly be solved. The case was officially closed. Mark was arrested and charged, but not for murder. He was charged for his role in creating the illegal website. David's life was spared, but forever changed. The fear, the paranoia, and the feeling of being watched never went away. The true crime saga of the Dark Web Hitman wasn't just about a murder plot. It was a stark warning about the new kind of evil in the modern world. The terrifying legacy of this case is that it proved the existence of countless similar services on the dark web, places where anyone could become a victim or with a single click, a perpetrator. It's a creepy new kind of warfare, fought not with guns, but with keystrokes and algorithms. A world where your identity, your life, can be bought and sold by a vanished entity that exists only as a ghost in the machine.